The thing about advanced civilizations is that they get really, really good at forgetting where food comes from. Take the interspecies diplomatic retreat on Kepler 442b, for instance. Beautiful planet, oxygen-rich atmosphere, plenty of wildlife, abundant vegetation. The perfect place to stick a bunch of arguing species representatives for 2 weeks and hope they'd learn to play nice. The retreat center itself was a marvel of modern convenience, climate-controlled biodomes, molecular food synthesizers, waste recyclers that could turn yesterday's lunch into tomorrow's building materials. Everything anyone could possibly need, assuming the supply ships kept coming. Spoiler alert, the supply ship did not keep coming. The cargo freighter, piloted by what could charitably be described as a moron with a license, had attempted an atmospheric entry at completely the wrong angle. The ship itself was fine, currently embedded in a canyon about 200 kilometers away. The cargo, however, had scattered across half the continent like the world's worst piñata. The food synthesizers at camp had taken shrapnel damage. The emergency rations had been stored, brilliantly, in the same compartment as the industrial solvent. And the backup communications array had experienced what technicians call a catastrophic failure and what everyone else calls an explosion. Rescue was coming. Eventually, probably in 5 to 7 days, once someone noticed the ship hadn't checked in. Until then, 15 sentient beings from 4 different species were stuck at a remote camp with absolutely no food and no way to call for takeout. The Velcrin were the first to properly panic. As a species, they resembled oversized praying mantises, if praying mantises wore bureaucratic sashes and had an unfortunate tendency toward administrative overthinking. They'd been surviving on precisely calibrated protein cubes for the last 3,000 years of their civilization. Protein cubes that came from factories that were very, very far away. Executive Administrator Zegret, the senior Velcrin present, had gone through all 7 stages of grief in about 20 minutes. Now he was stuck somewhere between bargaining and acceptance, his mandibles clicking in distress. This is unprecedented. Completely unprecedented. There must be protocols, emergency procedures, contingency planning documentation. The contingency plan was the emergency rations offered junior diplomat to Cricks, which are currently soaking in industrial solvent. Then we implement the backup contingency plan. That was the communications array, the backup to the backup. We're looking at it. It's us, standing here, being hungry. The Threscian delegation was handling things with slightly more grace, which is to say they were panicking quietly. They were a tall, willowy species, vaguely amphibious in appearance, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. Beautiful, elegant, and absolutely useless in a survival situation. They'd been living on nutrient paste dispensed from sterile tubes for so long that their word for cooking had become synonymous with ancient history. Ambassador Velkoth kept adjusting his ceremonial sash, a nervous habit. Surely the planet's ecosystem can provide sustenance. The preliminary surveys indicated abundant biological resources. Yes, but those biological resources are currently alive and inconveniently located outside, said his aide Rincha, with the kind of horror usually reserved for suggesting they all strip naked and run through fire. Then there were the Kukuthari, who were having an entirely different kind of crisis. They didn't exactly eat in the traditional sense. They were partially gaseous beings who absorbed synthesized mineral compounds through osmosis. Their physical forms looked like robed figures made of glowing mist, which was impressive right up until you realized they'd bioengineered themselves into complete dietary helplessness. They required very specific mineral supplements that came from very specific processing facilities. Luminary Ixto, speaking through a translation device since their natural communication was subsonic, expressed what could only be described as existential dread. We have approximately 4 days before our cellular cohesion begins to destabilize. This is suboptimal. Suboptimal is an interesting word for dying, muttered to Crix. And then there was the human. Marcus Webb sat on a rock at the edge of the panic circle, watching the various species spiral into crisis mode with the detached interest of someone watching a particularly chaotic reality show. He was an agricultural consultant, invited to the retreat because Earth was being considered for some kind of farming trade agreement. He'd spent the last 3 days listening to species argue about tariff structures and export regulations, which was exactly as exciting as it sounded. Now, watching a Velcrin administrator nearly molt from stress, he was having considerably more fun. So, he said, standing up and brushing dirt off his pants, "Anyone here know how to hunt?" The silence that followed was profound. Hunt, Schritt's translator made the word sound obscene. "Yeah, obtaining food from the environment, tracking animals, setting traps, gathering edible plants, stuff that's, alive right now." Velkoth looked faint. "You mean killing living creatures? For consumption? That is where meat comes from." "Yeah, that's barbaric." Marcus shrugged. "That's dinner. Or it could be if any of you are interested in not starving." Rinchar made a sound like water going down a drain. "But the ethical implications alone, the psychological trauma of taking a life for sustenance. You ate protein cubes that came from biological material," Marcus pointed out. "Yes, but it was processed in a facility, by machines. The violence was industrialized and therefore invisible. So you're fine with killing, you just don't want to watch." "Exactly. That's what civilization is." Marcus looked around at the assembled diplomats, scientists, and administrators. They looked back at him with various expressions of horror, confusion, and desperate hope. The Kukuthari were literally vibrating with distress. One of the junior Velcrin looked close to fainting, which was impressive for a species without blood pressure. "Right," Marcus said slowly. "So here's the situation. We've got 5 to 7 days before rescue. We've got no food. We've got a planet absolutely lousy with things to eat, if you're willing to get over yourselves. I can keep us fed. It won't be pretty, it won't be sanitized, and it definitely won't come in a sterile wrapper. But it'll keep you alive. Your choice." Jacquet's mandibles clicked rapidly. "What would this entail, exactly?" "I'm going to build some traps, catch some of the local wildlife, and process it. There's a river nearby, probably has fish or something similar. I spotted some fruit-bearing plants that look edible. We make fire, we cook food, we eat. Simple, simple," Velkoth repeated weakly. "How long have humans been doing this barbaric practice?" asked Luminary Ixtor. "Oh, only about 300,000 years, give or take." The Velcrin delegation exchanged looks. Their species had achieved spaceflight 8,000 years ago. The humans had been persistence hunting across African plains, while the Velcrin were still figuring out basic tools. "And this will actually work?" Chikrex asked. "We won't die of some horrible primitive food disease?" "I mean, I can't make any promises about you guys since I don't know your biology, but humans have been eating wild game since forever. Probably fine. Probably. I'm an agricultural consultant, not a xenobiologist. But I'm definitely your best shot at not starving, so maybe save the skepticism for after dinner." After several more minutes of debate, ethical hand-wringing, and one Velcrin requiring sedation, the group reluctantly agreed. What choice did they have? The alternative was slowly starving while debating the philosophical implications of the food chain. Marcus got to work immediately. He started by scouting the area around camp, looking for game trails and water sources. The aliens followed him like anxious ducklings, documenting everything with their various recording devices. The Velkrin were treating this like an archaeological expedition into humanity's barbaric past. The Thracian were fascinated in the way scientists are fascinated by grotesque things. The Q-Cathari just floated along, pulsing with anxiety. "You see these tracks?" Marcus pointed to marks in the soft earth near the river. "Something about the size of a large rabbit comes through here regularly. Probably drinks at dawn and dusk." "And you intend to murder this creature?" Velkoth asked. "I intend to catch it." "Yeah. Murder is a strong word for the food chain." "The food chain is murder with better marketing," Rinchar muttered. Marcus spent the next several hours constructing traps from materials he found around camp. Flexible branches, cordage made from plant fibers, rocks for weight. He built snares along the game trails, deadfall traps near burrow entrances, and a fish trap for the river. The aliens watched with mounting horror and reluctant admiration. "The principle is simple," Marcus explained, setting up a particularly clever snare. Animal follows its normal path, trips the trigger, loop tightens, quick and clean. "There is nothing clean about this," Shukrit said, but he was leaning in to watch closely. "I mean, it's cleaner than your protein cube factory. Probably. You ever seen inside an industrial food processor? I have not, and I would prefer to maintain that innocence." The Thracian aide Rinchar was taking extensive notes. "The ingenuity is remarkable, actually. Creating functional tools from raw environmental materials. Our species abandoned these skills millennia ago." "Yeah, most species do once they hit industrial food production," Marcus said, testing the trigger mechanism. "Makes sense, really. Why hunt when you can farm? Why farm when you can synthesize? But then your synthesizer breaks, and you're stuck in the woods having an existential crisis." "Is that what this is?" Tekrix asked. "Because it feels worse than that." The Q-Cathari luminary drifted closer, their gaseous form coalescing slightly. "You possess knowledge that our entire species has discarded as obsolete. Yet here, in this moment, it is the most valuable skill present. Funny how that works, isn't it?" Marcus worked through the night while the aliens retreated to the dubious shelter of the damaged camp. They tried to sleep, mostly failed, and spent the dark hours contemplating the fact that their survival depended on a human doing things their ancestors would have considered horrifyingly primitive. Dawn brought success. Marcus returned to camp carrying 3 rabbit-like creatures and a string of fish that looked close enough to earth trout to make him homesick. The aliens emerged from their shelters and immediately recoiled. "Are those dead?" Velkoth asked unnecessarily. "Very," Marcus confirmed cheerfully. "Traps worked perfectly. Now comes the fun part." This was not the fun part. Zuckrit's mandibles were rigid with stress. What followed was a masterclass in field dressing that would haunt the alien diplomat's dreams for years. Marcus processed the game with efficient, practiced movements, while his audience watched through splayed fingers, between mandibles, and through partially dispersed gaseous forms, respectively. "You're removing the internal organs," Rinchar observed, narrating the horror. "Yep. Don't need those. Well, some cultures eat them, but I'm trying not to traumatize you more than necessary." "How thoughtful," Velkoth said faintly. The Velkrin were experiencing what could only be described as a collective philosophical crisis. Their entire culture was built on hierarchy, order, and the complete sanitization of resource acquisition. Watching Marcus efficiently reduce living creatures to component parts was forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about where everything came from. This is what our protein cubes were once, Tekrix said quietly. Before the processing, before the factories. Everything was something else first, Marcus agreed. That's kind of how matter works. Next came construction of a smoking rack. Marcus built a frame from green branches, started a fire in a shallow pit, and added damp wood to create smoke. The aliens watched the setup with increasing interest, their initial horror gradually shifting to curiosity. You're preserving the flesh through dehydration and smoke exposure, Luminary Ixtor observed. Clever. It prevents bacterial decomposition, and it tastes good, Marcus added. That's actually pretty important. Taste, Velkoth said wonderingly. When did we stop caring about taste? The smoking process took hours. Thin strips of meat hung over the rack, slowly curing in the aromatic smoke. And here's where something unexpected happened. The smell got to them. The Velkrin, who claimed to have evolved beyond such primitive responses, found their mandibles secreting digestive enzymes involuntarily. The Thracian, who'd been surviving on flavorless nutrient paste, discovered their olfactory centers lighting up like festival displays. Even the Kukuthari, who didn't exactly breathe, found themselves drawn to the complex molecular compounds wafting through the air. I don't understand, Rinchar said, drifting closer to the smoke rack. My physiology is reacting to this. Why is my body interested in this? Because your species ate real food for millions of years before you invented paste tubes, Marcus said. You're hardwired to recognize nutrition when you smell it. Smoke, roasting meat, those are ancient signals that say food here, eat now, survive another day. The Thracian aide looked at his own hands like he'd never seen them before. We've engineered ourselves away from our own nature. Most species do. That's progress, I guess. Until it isn't. As the meat smoked, something remarkable happened. The aliens started helping. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Velkoth, using his species' excellent color vision, pointed out edible plants that Marcus had missed. Rinchar waded into the river and discovered he was naturally excellent at catching fish with his webbed hands. Even the Kukuthari found a purpose, using their energy fields to regulate the smoking fire's temperature with precision no human could match. Zyakret, the bureaucratic Velkrin administrator, turned out to have an unexpected talent for organizing the food preparation like a military operation. The fish should be processed separately from the land animals. Cross-contamination could be hazardous, and we'll need separate smoking racks for optimal airflow. You're managing a hunting camp, Tekrix pointed out with amusement. I'm implementing logical resource distribution protocols, Zyakret corrected stiffly. Then, quieter. But yes, I suppose I am. By late afternoon, they had a feast. Smoked meat, grilled fish, roasted tubers that Velkoth had identified, and some kind of wild grain that Rinchar had found growing near the river. Marcus had even managed to construct a decent cooking area with flat rocks for heat distribution. The aliens gathered around the fire as the sun set, sitting on logs and rocks in a circle that would have looked absolutely deranged to anyone from their respective civilizations. High-ranking diplomats and administrators, wearing their ceremonial garments, preparing to eat food that had been alive that morning. I can't believe we're doing this, Velkoth said. I can't believe I'm hungry for it, Rinchar admitted. Marcus started serving, and this is where millennia of civilized evolution met several million years of biological reality, and biology won handily. The Velkrin tried the smoked meat first, their mandibles tearing at it experimentally, Then their eyes widened, all 6 of them. "This has flavor," Zikrit said wonderingly. "Actual, complex flavor. Our protein cubes never had flavor." "That's because flavor is inefficient," Tariq said around a mouthful. "Oh ancestors, this is remarkable." The Thracian delegation approached their portions with scientific caution, analyzing before tasting. Then they started eating in earnest, making sounds that their species probably hadn't made in 10,000 years. Velkoth looked close to tears. "We forgot," he said quietly. "My entire species forgot that food could be like this. We optimized it away, made it simple and efficient and completely joyless. Even the Kuku-Thari found something. They couldn't eat the meat, but Marcus had prepared a mineral-rich broth by boiling certain plants. They absorbed it through their outer membranes and pulsed with surprised pleasure. This is adequate nutrition," Luminary Ixtor announced. "More than adequate. The mineral profile is actually superior to our synthesized compounds. Plus, it probably tastes like something other than recycled starship parts," Marcus offered. "We do not have taste receptors in the traditional sense, but yes, there is a qualitative difference we had not anticipated." As they ate, the conversation shifted. These were diplomats and scholars who'd spent days arguing about trade regulations and resource allocation without making any progress. Now, sitting around a fire eating food they'd helped prepare, they started actually talking. Zikrit admitted that Velkrin society had become so bureaucratized that nobody remembered how to do anything practical anymore. Velkoth confessed that Thracian culture was dying from sterility, from removing every element of risk and challenge until life became nothing but comfortable numbness. The Kuku-Thari luminary spoke about how their species had bioengineered themselves into such specialized fragility that they were one supply chain disruption away from extinction. "We've made ourselves helpless," Rinchar said. "All of us in different ways." "Not helpless," Marcus corrected. "Just dependent. There's a difference. You can learn this stuff again if you want to. Though fair warning, most species don't want to once they're comfortable. But comfort without competence is just waiting to die slowly," Tirfrik said. "Now you're getting philosophical on a full stomach. That's how you know dinner was good." They ate until they couldn't anymore, which took longer than expected, because none of them had experienced real satiation in years. Processed food was calibrated for perfect nutrition, perfect portions, perfect efficiency. It was never satisfying the way this rough, smoky, imperfect meal was satisfying. As the fire burned low, Velkoth looked at Marcus with something like wonder. "You saved our lives." "I made dinner," Marcus corrected. "You guys are the ones having an existential crisis about it. Can you teach us?" This from Zukrik, surprisingly. "Before the rescue arrives, can you teach us how to do what you did today?" Marcus considered the Velkrin administrator, this bureaucrat who'd probably never had an unauthorized thought in his life, asking to learn primitive survival skills. "Yeah, I can do that. Fair warning though, it involves more dead animals." "I think we can handle that now," Zukrit said. "I think we need to handle it." The next 5 days became an intensive survival course. Marcus taught them to track, to identify edible plants, to build better traps, to process game, to preserve food. The aliens approached it with the same intensity they'd once applied to their diplomatic negotiations, except now they were actually cooperating instead of arguing. The Velkrin discovered they were excellent at trap design once they stopped thinking of it as barbaric and started thinking of it as engineering. The Thracian found that their water affinity made them natural fishermen. The Q3 became experts at fire management and food preservation through temperature control. They built better shelters. They mapped food sources. They created a small smokehouse that would have made any homesteader proud. They stopped being bureaucrats and diplomats and started being people who knew how to feed themselves. When the rescue ship finally arrived on day 6, the response team found something unexpected. Instead of desperate survivors rationing emergency supplies, they found a functioning camp with a food surplus. The 15 delegates were well-fed, suspiciously cheerful, and absolutely filthy. The rescue coordinator, efficient Velcrin named Charter, stared at the smokehouse in confusion. "What is that structure?" "Food preservation system," Jarkrit explained proudly. "We built it ourselves. Well, the human taught us, but we did the actual construction. You built it, manually, with your hands, and some tools we made from rocks and sticks." "Yes." Charter's mandibles hung open. "That's insane. That's survival," Jarkrit corrected, "and we're taking the designs back with us, along with samples, recipes, and a complete methodology for primitive resource acquisition." The rescue team was baffled. The stranded delegates weren't traumatized, they were energized. They were talking about updating educational curricula, establishing wilderness training programs, and restoring knowledge their species had spent millennia forgetting. As they prepared to leave, Velkoth approached Marcus. "The trade agreement your planet wanted? Consider it approved. We'll recommend full agricultural partnership status. Because I kept you from starving, because you reminded us that we used to know things, important things, and maybe some of that knowledge is worth remembering, even if it's inefficient and messy and completely uncivilized." Marcus grinned. "So you're saying barbarism has its place? We're saying that competence is never barbaric. It's just uncomfortable for people who've forgotten how to be uncomfortable." The ships departed, taking the delegates back to their respective homeworlds. They carried with them smoked meat samples, detailed trap designs, and a newfound appreciation for skills their ancestors would have taken for granted. Within a year, wilderness survival courses had become mandatory for Velcrin administrators. The Thracian opened culinary institutes exploring flavor profiles beyond nutrient paste. The Q-Kitari began researching metabolic flexibility. And on Earth, Marcus Webb returned to his agricultural consulting job, completely unaware that he'd accidentally started a primitivism movement across 3 species. He'd just made dinner, after all. The aliens were the ones having philosophical revelations about it, though he did keep the thank you gift Sakret had sent, a ceremonial Velcrin hunting knife engraved with words that translated roughly to, "in case the synthesizer breaks again." Because that's the thing about advanced civilizations, they get really, really good at forgetting where food comes from. Right up until the supply chain breaks and someone has to remember, and then if they're lucky there's a human around who never forgot in the first place, who can look at a forest and see dinner, and who finds the whole situation just amusing enough to help. The universe is vast and full of wonders, ancient mysteries and technological marvels beyond imagining, but sometimes the most advanced thing you can know is how to feed yourself when everything else fails. That's not primitive, that's just being too stubborn to starve politely, and humans, bless their persistent little hearts, are very, very good at being stubborn.